This program is made possible by the loyal financial support of the friends and partners of Family Policy Institute.
You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world.
Good evening and welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us. This evening, our topic of discussion is adoptions. Now, there are 3.5 million orphans in South Africa. This is a frightening number. And of that 3.5 million orphans, only about 1,200 have been adopted or placed in families, which is the best environment to raise children. Now, to help us speak through why all of this is happening, I've invited Wayne Allen from an organization called Orphans 54 and Kay Lorenz from Resilient Kids, Resilient Children. Welcome to both of you, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Wayne, I want to start with you. Orphans 54, what is this organization and what is your vision?
Well, thank you for the invitation, Errol, for the platform to share about what we do. Orphans 54 is an organization that represents the 54 countries on the continent of Africa.
Okay.
Our vision is to see every child on our continent placed in a loving, permanent family and come to know their Heavenly Father.
That is wonderful because, all the research shows that the best environment for children is the two-parent biological family. Children need a mom and a dad. And to place children, orphans, in a family is the best thing we could possibly do for them because they need that family environment to thrive best. Now, I'm aware that there's this Children's Amendment Bill that is currently being debated in Parliament. There's a lot of pushback against it. It's controversial, all kinds of things. But tell us what the problem is with the Children's Amendment Bill, why it's not facilitating this adoptions, because we need so many children to be placed in families. It's not happening, and we need policy to be able to make that happen. So what is the challenge with the Children's Amendment Bill?
The bill was put forward on the 28th of October 2018, and there are some large discrepancies. Some of the other advocates in the space that are working alongside us have called it deeply flawed and regressive. I think that's probably the best definition or description of the bill. One of the primary issues, it ranges from children's privacy being violated in children's court issues, early child development centres being more difficult to establish. But the real big issue that we're on about today is the fact that anyone in private practice, any child protection organisation, any social worker, psychologist, therapist, doctor will not be able to charge fees at all if this bill goes through as is.
Wow.
And the impact of that is our bigger concern, is that currently state social workers are overloaded. Current or normative caseloads are sitting around 60 for state social workers, and they currently have loads of 180 to 200, some are even up to 300. And our concern is that what will happen, because an adoption is not an urgent matter, and it requires a fair amount of technical skill that not all those state social workers possess, that adoptions would simply fall to the bottom of an already overloaded system and would simply just not happen.
Yes.
And so this bill would actually end up terminating adoptions in South Africa. So,
and that's, just thinking that there's 3.5 million orphans in this country, and that you only have about 1,200 orphans adopted. We need to get a lot more children adopted into families, and we need the kind of government support to help facilitate that. We also need the church to get involved in this. So tell us, Wayne, what is needed to solve this issue? Because this is a crisis, really.
It is. I mean, just to give some context to your viewers, there are many different numbers thrown around in terms of how many orphans. And just to provide maybe a little bit of context. So UNICEF have put, in 2017 with the latest numbers, at 3.7 million, and probably adjusted for 2019, probably close to 4 million. the Actuarial Society of South Africa, which I tend to believe, are currently adjusted for 2019 sitting around 5.5 million orphans.
Wow.
All the way down to the children's gauged UCT sitting around 3 million orphans. Now the word orphan there are various definitions for the word orphan. So the UNICEF, the global definition is what they call a paternal, maternal and a dual orphan. So either you've lost your mother, your father, or both parents are gone. So the number that we're really most concerned about is the dual orphan. How many children are adoptable? And so that number sits at between 600,000 upwards of 1.2 million. Now to give you some context, you have 1,186 adoptions in the 2017-2018 financial year. 153 of those were inter-country adoptions and the remaining were domestic adoptions. Now, the other number that we hear a lot of, and Impilo and a child protection organization in Joburg did a fantastic event where they took 3,500 baby grows and actually laid them out. That is the annual number of abandoned babies per year in the country of South Africa. What's more concerning is that only those are the ones that are found alive.
Yeah.
We know that for every one found alive, two don't make it. So that number is actually you double that number, it gets to 11,500 babies are abandoned and 3,500 survive. So if you have 1,186 adoptions and you have 3,500 babies with absolutely no kin, what's happening there?
Yes. And the consequences of that, society is going to have to deal with it, Kay, because if there's so many children that are orphaned, that do not have parents, and the kind of love and guidance and security of having parents in a home, there are implications. What do you think the implications are for South Africa if we don't get this orphan crisis resolved in South Africa?
I think one of the big things that got my family involved in this was seeing how many children are stuck in institutions. And I think the institution in itself where the children are kept, just in the Cape, are overburdened. There's waiting lists. There's so many children who are stuck there, and because of the slowness of the system, they get stuck in the system.
Yeah, and that's not ideal for children, right? To get them into orphanages because there's a lot of abuse and neglect in state institutions. We want to get them out of institutions and into families.
Yeah, and even who's responsible for these institutions has been under debate for the last 3 years. So in the last 10 years, we've seen the decline of the support of the institution as well, but nothing was done in defense to help these children that are institutionalized get into families. So that has been a fascinating thing to watch, as care is not given in both the institutionalized child as well as helping the families who are caring for them as well.
Now, we just celebrated Father's Day and Youth Day, and there was a lot written about, and I wrote an article about just how fatherless homes are devastating to children and society. Now, can you imagine orphans without a father and a mother, how devastating it would be to those children and then to society? And I think we're not really discussing and debating these issues like we should, especially in the church, because the church has, I think, a major role, Wayne, to address this issue, to create public awareness, to help people understand 3.5 million orphans, 3,500 babies being abandoned every year in our country. And we're not really addressing these issues adequately. And now we have the Children's Amendment Bill that is not helping either, not helping this, because I heard or read somewhere that government is reluctant to place, for example, black children into families that are not of the same race or culture. They don't want to do that because for whatever reason. But then you got to ask the question, is it better for a child to be an institution orphaned and be an institution, an orphan, where there is abuse and neglect, or to have these children in a family, whether that family is white, colored, Indian, black, it doesn't matter, but a family is what the child needs. So, how do we correct this? What are the kind of things we need to do or start doing to address this issue? First, we want to deal with the Children's Amendment Bill. We have to get that right. We have to change something there. So maybe you'd speak firstly, Wayne, how can we do that? What can the church do? What can society do to bring about that change?
So what we're saying is retract and rework. So
The entire bill, pull that bill,
withdraw it.
withdraw it completely.
To do a patch job and to try and edit it is not, it's too deeply flawed. It's got so many holes in it that it wouldn't make any sense to try and, in the period that's been allowed, to be able to do that. So what we've seen is that this bill has been rushed. There's not been any due process or consultation followed. And
was there a lot of public participation in this bill?
So, I mean, there was prior to this, there was consultation with children's rights organizations, clauses that were agreed with government previously that were simply left out. Nobody really providing any reasons for that. What's most concerning, Errol, what really, it's just overwhelming, is to know that out of 197 sovereign nations on the planet, we rank first in terms of our orphan population as a percentage of our child population. So per capita orphans, we're number one. But yet we have one of the best legislations. Children's Act of 2005 is one of the best in the world. So where's the disconnect? And that's what you're alluding to, is that we've got the people that are executing or implementing that are not in agreement ideologically from what the bill is saying in terms of the best place for a child is reunification. Always you want to restore a child to their family or to their kin. And then thirdly, if those are not working, then you move to adoption. And I completely support having 3 adopted children and being a safety care parent to an additional 6. I completely support that a child needs to go to culturally first, first the same ethnic group, because it does introduce complications later on for that child that they would need to work through. So we honor that. So we want to support that. But what we're seeing is, despite that filter being there, you're still ending up with 600,000 to 1.2 million children. It doesn't matter. So what we need to say is that you need to consult. The government needs to pull this back. They had ample time to get this done, and they haven't taken their time. And the previous tenures of previous social development ministers, yes. And now they're forcing it through, and they're leaving certain clauses out. They're overlooking other aspects. They're not really considering the impact in terms of the Constitution, which protects a child's right to parental and family care. That's being violated.
So there's huge gaps in this bill that has to be addressed. And in the next segment, I'm going to be talking to Bridget Masango, who is the DA Shadow Minister for Social Development. And perhaps we would have to arrange a meeting with the Minister of Social Development, the new Minister of Social Development. But we'll start with Bridget, being the official opposition member that deals with the issue, and talk about what you've just said. I'm going to ask her that, is it possible for public pressure to be put on government to pull this bill, and to relook at it from scratch, to get organizations like yourself in and others and begin to find a way, what is the best solution for orphans in this country? We have 3.5 million orphans. We have 3,500 babies being abandoned every year in this country. We have to address these issues. And, we understand the cultural issues and all those kind of things, but I think the most important thing we have to address here, both Wayne and Kay, is government, civil society, the church, all of us must work in the best interest of the child.
Precisely.
The bill must be in the best interest of the child, not in the best interest of government or cultural groups or anybody. Precisely. Everything that must be done here, people meet, it's not in their own self-interest, because that's how we lose track here. We need to do what is in the best interest of the child. And number one is to get children that are orphans, do not have a mom or a dad, to be placed in a family where they can receive the love and the care they need so they can thrive in that environment. They need training. The adoptive parents need training on how to raise these children and how to adapt. And Kay Lorenz is going to talk a little bit in the next segment about the training aspect of that. And then Wayne will speak a little bit more about Orphans 54 and what they're doing. We're going to talk to Costa Mitchell, what the church can do to help facilitate, build public awareness. There's funding issues, and he'll talk about that as well. So don't go away. More with Wayne Allen and Kay Lorenz after the break. Welcome back to the program. I'm speaking to Wayne Allen from an organization called Orphans 54 and Kay Lorenz from Resilient Kids. Again, it's so great to have you in the studio to talk about this very, very critical issue, both of you. Now, Wayne, we're talking about resolving this because we have to resolve this. So the Children's Amendment Act is one of the things that we're going to have to address urgently. We've got to get the church involved. We've got to get the public involved to address this issue. And one of the things you're doing to address it is you have a petition going.
Yes.
So tell us about the petition.
Thank you. So our organization does two things through advocacy. One is as a child or children's rights organization to government, which is a specific issue where we have an imminent threat to adoption in our country. And the second one is to advocacy to the church, is to call the church up as families to stand up and to provide the environments that these children so desperately need. So we've created a petition and we're calling on the churches to sign the petition. And I'm sure you'll put a link, provide a link throughout.
Yes, Wayne's organization, Orphans 54, it's on your screen right now, and the website address is there as well. So you go to the website, and the petition is on that website. And we're asking you now to go to that website to sign the petition. And the petition calls on government to withdraw this Children Amendment Bill and to relook at it. And again, we need to do everything in our power to get children adopted, to have them placed. That's the bottom line here. We want to get children, orphan children, into families because that's the best place for their care, for their health, for their welfare. There's going to be training for parents that want to adopt, and we're making a call to people. They pray about this, think about this, adopting children that need the loving environment and care of moms and dads. And if you have space in your heart and in your homes, adopt children. We're going to be working on the bill, but we want you to prepare your hearts for this. But you can be trained because it's not a small step. So, Kay, training for parents, adoptive parents, is going to be critical.
Yeah, I think misunderstanding that a lot of people make, that you just take an orphan, you put them in a loving family and everything will be okay.
Yeah, one would assume that it's...
child just needs love, right? And even us as a family, when we got into this, we also thought like this, just bringing a child home would be, they get a family, surely it's going to be good, right? But this realization that children are changed by trauma, they're changed by removing them from their families, they're changed by being, just living in institutions. So I think the thing that we want to help Christians understand is it is going to change you. It's going to be it's a difficult process, but there's so much you can do to prepare yourself to be able to counteract the stuff that's changed this child. And with God, with the right, a lot of it's play and games with children that will help you attach to these children, will help them to grow in believing that you're safe, that they're now in care. And that's part of the training, is how do you do that? What is this thing? Because trust is not something you can touch. It's not tangible, but you can build it.
Yes, you can.
And that's...
But isn't just putting a child in the family environment as part of the healing process? That's the major healing for children that has been traumatized because of their situation. You put a child in a family, having mom, dad, and maybe siblings, being in a home, loved, cared for, that is going to change things for that child.
Yeah, certainly, because I think if a child becomes convinced that I think the basic human need to trust, if they're in a family where they know this is going to be okay, through thick or thin, you're going to be there for me, you're going to help me through this process, that child can actually relax and get out of a survival mode or wanting to, have to fend for themselves, where they realize, like, okay, I'm safe now, I don't have to do that. Then that child is going to come to a place where all of them is able to come forth.
Okay.
They're allowed to heal. Leaving a child in an institution, that system inside of them that says I have to survive, that's what rules the whole time. That child's never going to grow into their full potential because they can't actually relax there. Their needs are not going to be met there. So then we don't see children coming into their full potential.
And that's the reason we have to get them out of institutions or prevent them from going into institutions. We got to work as the church of Jesus Christ, as God's people. We know that children need families. They need a mom and a dad. And we must do everything in our power and our ability to get children into those families. Now, if there's people, parents, watching this program right now and they say, you know what, I want that training, I want to understand what it would take to adopt children into our family, how do they contact you?
They can visit our website as well.
Just say what your website is.
resilientkids.org.za.
resilientkids.org.za. We're going to put that on the screen right now, and you can get hold of Kay Lorenz, and she's going to help you understand, or maybe talk about training, possible training, so that you can prepare yourself to be an adoptive parent, because that's what we need in South Africa. 3.5 million orphans in South Africa, 3,500 babies being abandoned every year, and we need to address those issues because society is going to pick up the whirlwind. Society is going to suffer the consequences of just neglecting and leaving these children, because it is our responsibility as society, as Christians, as God's people, to come together and address this issue. So Wayne Allen, talk about some solutions going forward now. Your organization, Orphans 54, when you're working with others, I must mention that, other organizations, to bring about the resolution, to solve this problem, and to get people aware about how we do that. Now, obviously, funding is needed in all of this. Funding is always a critical issue. So tell us how you're going to address the funding issue.
Okay, so what we've developed is what we call a fund management approach. Most organizations will approach you with their specific needs. So if they're a baby home, which we are as well, they would say, please can you sponsor my baby home, or please can you sponsor my X or Y or Z. What we've said is we want to create specific funds, so whether it be an education fund or a medical care fund or a transport fund, that will assist qualifying families to be able to receive funding. So if you have a large corporate that says we're only interested in sponsoring education, maybe in the maths and science sphere, that we would say, listen, here are the families, here is a child specifically that is in need of funding. This family is struggling to support that child. We've screened the family, and we can ensure that your funding goes directly to the service provider. So in fact, doesn't pass through the family, but that we're assured through an audit trail that that fund is going to exactly to that child's need being met and not getting waylaid somewhere along the line.
Okay, so there's going to be funding. You're working on this with organizations overseas and locally to get funding to support families, to help them, the training and everything they need to adopt the parents. So that's good. There's a lot of help and support in that. Anything else that people should be aware of concerning this issue?
I think we've got some amazing other organizations, advocates doing an amazing job on the rights issue. But in terms of the socio and the economic, financial impacts, there's very little being said. Nobody's looking at how much money it's costing the state to keep a child in an institution. Some of the research that we found in 2005, done by Cornerstone Economic Research, showed that if we adjust the numbers for today, we're looking at excess of 2 million rand per child over a 10-year period, compared to 10,000 rand for an adoption. So a child from 0 to 6 in an institution will cost the state 2 million rand, and to place that child in a family will cost them 10,000 rand. So we're talking about orders of magnitude more expensive to look after a child through its 18 years under state care, and those numbers exclude medical and education. What we also haven't considered is what happens to those children when they age out. So when that child enters the workforce, we currently have a youth unemployment rate of 65% if you include discouraged workers who don't have life skills, who don't have somebody else looking out for them, who are not a contributing member to society. If we don't look after our orphans, not only will it cost us an exorbitant amount to care for them, but it'll cost us later on in terms of our orphans will become our most dependent and dysfunctional members of our society. At best, they will be unemployed. At worst, they'll become our prison population.
Yes, and that is so sad, because that's what the stats show in South Africa and even overseas, that young men from fatherless homes are more likely to end up in prison, more likely to end up drug abusers, alcoholics, get into crime and violence, gangsterism. We got a big issue here in the Western Cape with gangsterism. Young children being shot to death while gangs are fighting and shooting at each other. And most of the men in gangs come from fatherless homes, broken and dysfunctional homes. So, social issues like that, I think, should be the focus of our government, of our church, of society. I don't think we're addressing these issues, the family issues. The family issues, I think, is the most critical issue because it is said that as the family goes, so goes society, and we can actually see that.
Yeah.
And so we've got to address the family issues, the marriage issues, strengthening families, supporting children, but also the orphan issue. I think the orphan issue is a biggie in this country because we have the largest, as you said, in the world, the largest orphan population in the world, 3.5 million orphans, and we are not winning when it comes to adoptions, to getting these orphans into families, and that's what Wayne Allen of Orphans 54 and Kay Lenz from Resilient, Kay Lorenz, not Lenz, Lorenz, from Resilient Kids is doing. They're working with other organizations. And again, coming back to the Children's Amendment Bill, a lot of people worried about this. On social media, I can see the postings of so many people worried, concerned about this bill, that it's going to undermine this process of getting children into families. It's not going to help it. It's going to undermine it. It's going to stop it. And that is cruel. That is a crisis in this country, that if children need to get into families and government is stopping that from happening through bad legislation. So we've got to pull that bill. We've got to withdraw it from Parliament, and we've got to get people, child rights organizations and Christian organizations, churches involved in this, and perhaps working with government, helping government understand, look, this is how we're going to solve this problem. These are the real issues, and this is what you've got to do. That's why I'm going to be speaking to Bridget Masango, because she's in Parliament. She's the Shadow Minister, DA Shadow Minister for Social Development. She's a Christian. She loves the Lord, and she will help us to get this thing done. So a reminder to go to the website, Orphans 54 website, go to that petition, sign that petition. We want our government to know there are millions of South Africans out there concerned about the Children's Amendment Bill. We want that bill withdrawn. We want people to come around the table with government, including church representatives, to talk about how we can resolve this issue, because we have to. 3.5 million orphans and counting. We, the church, have to lead in this. So I want to thank Wayne and Kay for coming in and talking about these critical issues. Next up, I'm going to be speaking to Bridget Masango, DA Shadow Minister for Social Development, and then I'm going to talk to Pastor Costa Mitchell, talk about what the church should be doing to resolve this issue. So don't go away. Welcome back to the program. We are standing in the NPA building here in Cape Town, and my guest is Bridget Masango, who's the DA Shadow Minister for Social Development in the South African Parliament. Bridget, thank you so much for coming through and speaking to us about this very important issue of orphans in our country. Now, as you know, we have 3.5 million orphans in South Africa. I've spoken to Wayne Allen and Kay Lorenz about the struggles they're having to facilitate the process to get more children, orphans, adopted into or get them into families. So being the DA Shadow Minister in Parliament for Social Development, are you concerned about the Children's Amendment Act like others are?
Thanks, Errol, for having me here today. Yes, coming to the concern that you are talking about, I would be remiss if I wasn't concerned about what is happening. But one has to mention that the amendment bill has not been tabled before the Portfolio Committee yet. Although it was processed by Cabinet in the 5th Parliament, we are waiting for it to be tabled before us this term. The concern about the increasing, I may add, number of orphans in this country and the very declining numbers in terms of adoptions is a huge concern. You will know that we're talking about the amendment bill. You will know that the Children's Act is all about the best interest of a child.
That's right.
And you just mentioned earlier on offline that the family, every child needs a family where there's a mom and a dad, where they are cared for, where they are sort of brought up in some level of principles and values and things like that. So for the child to have their best interest taken care of, they would need to be in a family. As a Christian myself, I know that family is a nucleus of any society where you get developed as a child, and you grow up to know what is wrong and what is right. So that's a huge concern. But going back to the bill being tabled, I have met with a whole lot of people in the sector, adoption agencies, people who are in advocacy for adoptions, and just the general interest of children, and they have made very strong, comments about how concerned they are about the impending amendment bill to be tabled before us. So one is sort of prepared in terms of what issues to raise. You would remember that the DA leader, the federal leader, Musa Maimane, during his congratulatory message to the president, he said, if the president works in the best interest of the people of this country, we will work with him, no problem. But if we find that that is not the case, because we are all about the interest of the people of this country, we will then come up with solutions that we will table, that we will work with other interested parties to ensure that the best interest of the people of this country are taken care of.
Yes. So then that brings me to the question, is the DA, as the official opposition in Parliament, opposed to the Children's Amendment Bill?
Well, I don't know about the amendment bill because it hasn't officially been tabled. But if one listens to what has been said and one has read the documents that have been shared by the people in the sector, it is alarming that any amendment bill like that can be actually placed for processing into becoming an act of Parliament, because it, first of all, would make sure that what I'm calling declining numbers of adoptions at the moment, it will grind to a halt.
Yes, because the stats we have is that there's 3.5 million orphans and only 1,186 children have been placed in families, successfully been adopted by a family. Now that is scary and frightening statistics to, anybody would obviously agree that to have 3.5 million orphans and then to have only 1,186 adoptions is way below what we should be doing. Because the research shows, again, that children need a family. Children need a mom and a dad to thrive. They do best in that environment on all indexes. So then, Bridget, would you then, when this amendment bill is tabled at the committee, would you then raise objections against it and argue this case that maybe this bill should be withdrawn, because it's what Wayne Allen is saying. It should be withdrawn in its entirety, and we must start from scratch, getting all the role players around the table to begin to develop a bill that is in the best interest of the child, so that we can speed up the adoption processes, get these children into families. And the other issue I want to ask you about is there seems to be resistance to placing children into families that are of a different culture to the child. Do you see a problem there as well?
Right, yes, most definitely. When the bill is being presented to us, and as I say, I've read and actually spoken to people, we will have to raise issues with the bill. And also, even as you say, one of the people that you interviewed have said, if it has to be scrapped, we can call for it to be scrapped as a bill, because you cannot have a situation where the numbers of orphans are increasing and the numbers of adoptions are decreasing. That is totally against what we are supposed to be about as lawmakers. We need to make laws that are facilitating what is good in society. And in this case, it doesn't sound like that is what is happening. We will surely involve even other parties in Parliament to make sure that this bill does not see the light of day in its current form, because then it is counterproductive for what as the Portfolio Committee of Social Development are about. We are here to make sure that there is care, that there is contact, that there is a development of all those that are within the social development sector, in this case children. Also, I have read and it has been confirmed by the people I've met with that the children that stay in institutions and people try and adopt them, and if an adoption starts, and it delays, and that child grows, the adoptive parents say, we cannot take a child over a certain age. So this is not good for anyone. It's not good for the adoptive parents. It's not good for the children themselves. It just means that children stay in institutions, and none of us would like children to be in institutions all their lives, because then they miss out on the right even of being cared for, as the law says to us. Yeah. So we will work on that. We will also engage other parties in Parliament and work towards ensuring that a bill in its form does not see the light of day.
Okay. So in its current form, these child rights organizations like Orphans 54, Resilient Kids and others, that it seems as if government prefers these children going into institutions like orphanages, where there is neglect, where there is abuse. Not in all cases, but we do have that. So the best environment is to place them in a family, but there is some cultural concerns as well, like, for example, putting black kids in with a white family, the cultural differences, people are concerned about that, and it seems like this bill is saying we'd rather have the child institutionalized in an institution rather than a family of a different culture.
Right, and that is not in the best interest of the child at all, because whose culture is in an institution, if a child then ends up in an institution and not in any family. And I believe, and I'm not an expert on culture and things like that, but I believe that a culture that a child gets is the one of the family where they are brought up. And I don't know that there's a problem with that, even as a parent myself. I believe that a child deserves to be in a family, and the culture of that family will be what that child will adopt. And especially when you compare that to a child being in an institution, because then I can imagine there is no culture there. If this culture, narrative is being taken on in that sense. So it is, for me, I would say that for a child to be in a family is better than for a child to be in an institution.
Absolutely, I agree with you completely that children, the best environment for children is a family. And government must do its best, and the social development department must do its best to see that. Now, this children's amendment bill, the child's rights organizations, Wayne Allen and others, are saying that it does appear that this bill was cobbled together by politicians who don't really have an understanding of the real issues. Politicians sitting in a committee room put this thing together. That's why it's not making sense and it's not working in the best interest of the child. Would you then recommend Bridget Masango as the Shadow Minister for Social Development in Parliament that we withdraw the bill and we invite all the role players, like all these child's rights organizations, people that are working with children, people that are working in organizations that is trying to facilitate adoptions of orphans and even training families so that they can complete the process of adoption. All of these people need to be called together, brought on board, and a new discussion needs to start as what is the best way to put a bill together that is going to take everything into account, the protection of the children, the cultural sensitivities, all those things. But at the end result must be that we speed up the process of getting orphans into families.
Yes, I agree totally with that, Errol, because also when you talk about the issue of family, of orphans, growing up in institutions, and the bill itself, I don't know what the reason for the bill is. From what one has read, it said things like what you are saying, the culture. It said things like to say that adoption needs to be accessible to all people. And it says that, so if you say that you want the adoption to be accessible to all people, but you are saying that you are not going to pay the people that are processing this adoption, this very specialized process called adoption. You are actually saying that adoption must come to an end in this country, and one is waiting very anxiously to actually have the bill tabled and being processed. As I speak to you now, I have, in preparation even for this interview today, because I was mindful of the fact that it has not been tabled before us, I have spoken to our legal unit as the Democratic Alliance to say, guys, can we please look at this bill, because the attention or the interest that it has drawn from people who know best about adoption in the sector warrants that as politicians we do not do what we are not supposed to do, and what we do is eventually, ultimately, in the best interest of the children. I agree totally with the fact that the people that know best about this sector are the ones that are brought on board, that are the ones that where we use every single parliamentary intervention that we can to go for public hearings, to go for consultations, to get minority reports, or everything that we can do must be done. It is worth it for the best interest of children of this country.
Absolutely, Bridget, and I can't agree with you more, because just the stats is frightening. 3.5 million orphans, 3,500 babies are abandoned every year in this country, and we're not addressing those issues. The implications for society, you and I both know, is horrendous if we do not grapple with this thing. So, Bridget, I want to thank you once again for coming from Parliament to the NPA building just to talk to us. And we want to get you back once that bill is tabled, the Children's Amendment Bill is tabled, once you raise your objections, and once maybe new process has begun, we want to get you back to talk about it. But thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. I would really appreciate an opportunity to come back once we have looked at the bill at an official parliamentary level. Thanks, Errol. Sure.
Welcome back to the program. Our topic of discussion this evening is adoptions in South Africa, or orphans, to put it better. My guest to talk us through this is Reverend Costa Mitchell, a Christian leader that has been leading a large denomination in South Africa for many, many years. Costa, welcome to the studio. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Errol.
Now, I've spoken to Wayne Allen and Kay Lorenz about this issue. We have 3.5 million orphans in South Africa. About 1,186 were adopted in the past years, and we're obviously lagging far behind because I'm sure you will agree we need to get these children into families. The best place to take care of a child is in a family with a mom and a dad, but that is not happening. One of the things I want to ask you is, how can the church play a role in facilitating this, to getting these orphans, these vulnerable children into families, number one. And secondly, we have the issue with the Children's Amendment Bill. And maybe we should start there. Children's Amendment Bill that is not helping facilitate this process. Wayne believes, and many others, that it's actually undermining. It's going to undermine the process for adoptions, for foster care, all of those things. It's not helping. And he believes the bill must be removed or withdrawn in its entirety and re-looked at. And here perhaps we need church leaders also to get involved, because this is the very heart of the Lord, to take care of children. Wayne said Psalm 68 verse 2 says, God places the solitary, the lonely in a family.
Yes.
And I think if the Bible tells us that it should be our sort of objective as well.
Yes, so let's start from the point of view of the amendment and the fact that it is a new obstacle that is actually being put in the way of a pathway that many have tried, and we can actually think about how difficult things were a few years ago when families were trying to adopt and found, particularly in the Western Cape, that there were officials who were actually actively blocking the process. And for all kinds of reasons. The main reason that was stated was cultural dilution, the fact that these children were likely to lose their culture if they were adopted by either families of a different culture or even from a different country. I think that we must, on one hand, we must be sensitive to that fact, but I think that the answer is not to legislate. The answer is to help everyone to be aware that cross-cultural adoption, in particular, is something that requires a sensitivity on the part of the adopting families as much as it does on the part of officialdom.
So my previous guest, Kay Lorenz, indicated that there is training for parents that want to adopt.
Yes.
In that issue is to prepare them, equip them to deal with the cultural issues.
Yes.
But I still think that the ideal here is to get children into parents, and we cannot use the cultural differences as a roadblock or an obstacle, because it's not in the best interest of the child to do that. So I think the Children Amendment Bill, would you support that, that this bill be withdrawn in its entirety and re-looked at and reworked? Because, again, Wayne Allen says that there are more parents waiting to adopt children in this country than, and have been refused. They just cannot get the opportunity to get these children, to adopt these children, even though they are. And the bill is not helping. The legislation is not helping. Now, unfortunately, the reality is we need proper legislation to regulate all of this, because adoption is it's a critical thing. You can't just let anybody be taking children. It needs to be regulated properly. So that's why we need proper regulation. So you support the bill? Absolutely.
I think that what is necessary is to take a step back and to have a proper conversation between all of the disciplines, including the various institutions that are looking at the issue of orphans, as well as government, as well as the churches. Because from my side, to come to the second part of your question, I believe that the church has to recognize this as a primary responsibility. But that doesn't mean that we can do anything unilaterally. In past years, there were private adoption agencies. There were, privately arranged adoptions, and that still happens in places like the United States, for example. Whereas here, things are seemingly much more centrally controlled, and so it's not something that the churches can do unilaterally. But certainly what we want is to be a part of a conversation that will re-look at this in the interests of the children themselves. The second part of that is then that you and I had a conversation about this similar topic around the time that the abortion bill was being introduced.
Yes.
Which was to say, if we protest against the idea of abortion on demand, which is absolutely, I don't think it's even a negotiation. If we are going to do that, we must also be prepared to be a part of the solution.
That's right.
In other words, that if we say to a young woman who doesn't want the child that she is bearing, that we say, do not abort that child, but at the same time, we will stand ready to offer you the counseling, the care, the postnatal provision, etc., and also that we will put take the child into a process where adoptive parents can be sought. Now, once again, that is being interrupted by legislation like the amendment that we're talking about.
Children's Amendment Act, yes.
But what we believe is that that idea needs to be followed up with awareness raising in the church.
Yes.
So for me, that's the first order of business.
Public awareness is going to be a key here, so that the church can inform, firstly, parents in the churches that there are 3.5 million orphans in our country that needs care, and for people to begin to pray, and husband and wives talking to each other about the possibility of adopting children,
Yes.
taking care of them, because I believe it's what God wants us to do.
That's right.
Firstly. The other thing is, and you touched on it, is that there's 3,500 babies being abandoned every year in South
That's right.
Africa.
That's right.
3,500. Now, not even to talk about the abortions, because if there weren't abortions in this country, those numbers would be astronomically high. But are we prepared? Again, you raised the issue, is the church prepared? What are we doing? Are we having these discussions? What are the solutions to begin to deal with these issues? What can the church do to call on government to withdraw this bill?
Yeah.
Because it's not helping.
Yeah.
It's causing more of a crisis. Can the church leaders in this country come together and say, government, we want to work with you to bring the solution for our orphans? This is not the way to go. The Children Amendment Bill is not the way to go. You need to withdraw it. We want to come together with the other role players and begin to find a proper solution to get
Yeah.
children into families.
Yes, I think, again, that's why I think a conversation is necessary. But it must be a conversation with a great deal of emphasis by the church on the fact that this is not negotiable. You know, it's interesting, isn't it, that Jesus talks about judgment being based on how you treat your children, and that's national judgments. Matthew 25 talks about the fact that inasmuch as you did this to one of the least of these, you did it also unto me.
Wow.
And so he's talking about abandonment. He's talking about cruelty. He's talking about abuse. And again, we can talk about orphans suffering all of those in various ways in the country, while we turn a blind eye. And so what Jesus is saying there is, judgment is not for the abuser, judgment is for the apathetic, the person who does not do what is necessary to be done.
Even when they're capable to do
When
so.
they're capable of doing
it's
it.
basically
Yes.
you turning
Yes.
and looking the other way. And then, of course, we recently celebrated Father's Day, Youth Day, and the whole issue of fatherless homes and
Yes.
the consequences for society on
Yeah.
fatherless homes.
Yeah.
We're grappling with the issue here in the Western Cape with the gangsterism issue, and we see most of these young men that get into gangs, young women as well, come from broken homes, from fatherless homes. And now we have 3.5 million orphans that is not going to have the benefit of being raised in a family, in a loving, secure environment, not have a mom and a dad, not the boundaries and the values. You know, we're just perpetuating this
Precisely.
crisis in South Africa. So in a generation's time, if we don't solve the issue with the orphans, what are our society going to look like?
Yes. Well, again, there are so many scriptures that talk about this, including the one in Malachi about God wanting to turn the hearts of fathers to their children and children to their fathers.
That's right.
Lest I come and smite the land with a curse. So, you know, when you look at all of this, judgment is something that kind of has a snowball effect. That the processes of neglect of families, children that are either abandoned or, as you said, fatherless, that perpetuates something into the next generation and into basically the highways and the byways of society.
Yeah, and we look at the crime issues in South Africa,
Yeah.
crime and violence.
Yeah, drug abuse.
All of
so
those
many
things are escalating. We have the highest rates of teen pregnancies
Yes.
in the world now. Teen pregnancies, and all the research shows that a young girl growing up in a home without a father,
Yes.
right, without a father, are more likely to get involved
Yeah.
in premature sexual activity, and then, you know, teenage pregnancies, involved in abortions, all these kind of things. But it starts at the family level.
It does.
The family being the foundation of society. When it goes wrong there, it goes wrong everywhere.
Yeah.
Society has to pick up the pieces. And again, we're coming back to the church. You as a church leader, Costa, you know, do you know, just your honest opinion, do you think the church is really addressing these issues like it should?
No, I don't think so. I think that what has happened is that the church has, and again, there's every reason that why the church needed to do this. It's addressed things on a macro level. It's addressed things like structural injustice. It's addressed things like economic injustice, and of course racism, etc. And in the meanwhile, the children are being neglected.
Yes.
The children who, and as you say, the building block of society is the family. And so we're talking about changing legislation to affect political parties, or to affect structures, or to affect education and things like that. Now, some of those might be well motivated, and the church has been involved in many of those conversations. But I really think that we must get back to the simplicity of what is called the main and the plain. You know, James leaves us in no doubt at all. The primary purpose of the church, the primary responsibility of the church, is to care for its widows and orphans. When we look even at the level of finance, the primary reason for the giving of one of the primary reasons for the giving of the tithe was to make sure that widows and orphans were cared for.
Yeah.
Whereas what many churches are doing is using that to buy an aeroplane for their pastor,
Exactly.
or
And
put up a bigger building.
With
You know, so-
multimedia and smoke
yes,
machines and all
yeah,
of those kind of things.
exactly.
And I think we've lost focus of the primary purpose God has established the church in the world and here in South Africa, and that is to take care of people, to advance God's kingdom.
That's
that brings healing and restoration.
Yeah.
And perhaps we're losing sight of that. And this wake-up call about the 3.5 million orphans in South Africa, I think, should begin to make us think. And I think Wayne Allen and Kay Lorenz and Reverend Costa Mitchell is helping us understand that the church needs to get more involved in this issue. If we don't, the consequences is dire for our society. Already we can see what is happening in South African society with fatherless homes, more and more children neglected, abused. We're going to pick up the pieces for that. We can change this. These problems are not insurmountable, but there has to be a will, passion and commitment to roll up our sleeves and get involved. And so the details on the screen there for Orphans 54. Want you to go to that website, get more information, contact Wayne Allen about these issues if you want to help, if you want to adopt. You need information, go to the petition on the website. Sign that petition to go to Parliament to say to our government, withdraw this Children Amendment Bill. It's not working. It's undermining the process. We need to help get more families involved in adoption, and the amendment is not going to help us. We need to relook at it, and we need to get everybody involved to talk about these issues. So, Costa, welcome. Thank you once again for coming to the studio. God bless you.
Thank you, Errol.